Okay. Yep, that's essentially, this is panel session 3, Anthroposensibilities, Disparities, Accountability, Conservation, and Citizenship. I am the panel chair. I am Archill Niña F. Capistrano. I am from the University of the Philippines, Cebu, and with me are 4 undergraduate students of the political science program of UP Cebu, and you will be seeing them shortly. Okay, we will be, allow me first, of course, to read every the abstract, of our panel. And of course, I would also like to present the paper presenters one by one. So let me begin with our panel. What is the panel all about? So as intellectual forage for the Anthropocene flexes sense-making to how alarming geologic changes and challenges inform global affairs, this panel, again entitled Anthroposensibilities, Disparity, Accountability, Conservation, and Citizenship, proceeds from issues of blameworthiness and accountability to critiquing and reimagining solutions and citizenship in our vulnerable and degraded planet. It begins with a look at the ironies of how creative destruction that is largely attributed to the champions and beneficiaries of the neoliberal or capitalist world order on one side of the globe negatively affects everyone else on a planetary scale. It proceeds with a survey and critique of solutions specific to climate change and pandemics, as well as their impact on policymaking. It culminates with reflections for global citizenship in the face of consumerism on the one hand, and the imperatives of sustainability on the other hand. Paper 1 will be presented by Stephany Bulante, a BA Political Science, third year of UP Cebu. Her paper is entitled Differences in Extremity of Environmental Pollution and its Contribution to the Increasing Gap of North-South Global Division. It will be followed by paper 2 by Bea Castrence, also a third year BA Political Science student of UP Cebu. Her paper is entitled AnthropoSEEN. It's recognizing accountability in the global environmental change in the 21st century. To proceed from this paper is paper 3 by Mayumi Ampon, BA Political Science, third year student also of UP Cebu. Her paper is entitled Greener Solutions, an analysis on how habitat conservation and proper wildlife trade regulation can prevent pandemics. After paper 3 will be the last paper presentation from yours truly. It is entitled Intergenerational Responsibility versus Consumerist AnthropoSEEN, Reflections for Global Citizenship. So those are the 4 papers. And as we proceed with this panel presentation, allow me now to read the abstract from paper 1, entitled Differences in Extremity of Environmental Pollution and its Contribution to the Increasing Gap of North-South Global Division. The vulnerabilities of the environment increases as nations progress toward economic development. Moreover, there is a substantial difference in the extremity of the environmental pollution between developing countries and developed countries. In this study, the researcher found out that developing countries are more affected by environmental pollution compared to the developed countries. Furthermore, this significant difference in severity of environmental pollution amplifies the disparity between the global north and the global south. This paper engages the emergent discourse on the Anthropocene in relation to the notion of north-south global divide as influenced by colonial perspectives. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the first paper presentation entitled Differences in Extremity of Environmental Pollution and its Contribution to the Increasing Gap of North-South Global Division, to be presented to us by Stephany Bulante. Stephany, you now have the virtual floor. Stephany, you are muted. Please unmute yourself. And then, okay. And
am I audible, Miss?
You are now audible.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
And we will have 10 minutes. By the way, we have 10 minutes for every presentation. So Stephany, because you are doing your paper presentation live, we will be hearing this alarm or tone rather, 5 minutes before the end of your presentation. Technicals, please.
Is my presentation visible, Miss?
You're not yet.
Oh, okay.
That is now visible. Okay.
Okay.
Let us listen first to the alarm. Okay, 5 minutes before the end of your time. This is what you're going to hear. Technicals. Let's just wait a little while for the sound. Okay, so that we can get used to the sound. Just waiting for the technicals to play the alert 5 minutes before the time. Technicals, please. All right, so that's 5 minutes before the time is up, and then the last when the time is up, this will be what you will hear, Stephany. Definitely not the dog, I think. Yeah, okay. So did you hear that?
Yes,
I know
yes, attorney.
Okay, all right. Thank you. So let us hear your presentation, Stephany. You now have the floor.
Thank you. So good day, everyone. I am Stephany Jan Bulante from the University of the Philippines, Cebu, and my paper argues that there is an apparent and substantial difference in the extremity of the environmental pollution in countries with developed and developing economies, and we aim to explore how the difference contributes to the increasing gap between the affluent and poor countries. So humans were able to change the perspective or their fate from being insignificant animals to being the dominant factor and geological agents that continuously and consciously shape the Earth's geologic environment. So they have caused the alteration of the Earth, including the long-term geological processes at an increasing rate. Hence, we are introduced to a proposed new geological epoch called Anthropocene. Now, human activities such as intensified agricultural practices, increase in land use and deforestation, industrialization, energy use from fossil sources, and the growing population contribute to the perennial devastation of the Earth. And in history, humans have emitted about 450 billion tons of carbon since the Industrial Revolution, resulting in today's various environmental concerns, continuously affecting both environmental and social well-being. Now, states, specifically those with developing economies, recognize that eventually they have to choose between economic progress and saving the environment. On one hand, the state strives for economic growth because it is how we can improve the quality of our standard of living, and it enables us to cater any increase of our population without having to lower our standard of living. Now, on the other hand, to achieve such growth, one has to make use of the natural resources. However, excessive and unrestrained use of these natural resources predispose long-term environmental challenges. So with globalization opening the market in global setting, individual economies are becoming more competitive, and along with individuals' personal interests, people have overused shared natural resources, prompting pressing environmental concerns, including the rapidly increasing environmental pollution. Now, environmental pollution induces various environmental challenges, impairing our environmental and socio-economic development. So countries with developing economies lack necessary skills and resources to escape heavy reliance on production from agriculture or mineral resources. So according to Chakrabarty and Mandal, the environmental challenges in these countries are even more stringent for two reasons. First, the development centers on achieving higher growth to alleviate poverty for their overall growth rather than on environmental protection. Second, developing economies cannot afford the cost of having strict environmental regulations as they prioritize growth that helps them to fight poverty rather than investing in technologies and management that optimize environmental harms. Now, conversely, countries with relatively high levels of economic growth and security also experience the same environmental challenges. However, their established economic growth can support their measures in mitigating ecological crisis. So for instance, according to the National Academy of Sciences, the United States can dramatically reduce its reliance on fossil fuels and nearly phase out coal, lowering carbon dioxide emissions by 2030 while saving consumers and businesses money through investing primarily in energy efficiency and renewable energy sources. So ostensibly, it will be difficult for developing countries to apply the same approach used by the developed counterparts. So while countries with developed economies are hustling on actualizing their environmental protection plans, countries with developing economies are continuously plagued with social inequalities while prioritizing and striving for economic growth to improve quality of life. Yet these countries are compelled to follow patterns of development determined by the developed world using the rate of growth in GNP as a yardstick by which to measure their progress. So therefore, it is evident that, as what Persady and Ramlogan said, the relationship that exists between development issues and environmental protection is such that one tends to be achieved at the expense of the other, and it is usually the environment that becomes the hapless victim. Now, how does the extremity of environmental pollution catalyze the gap between the global north and the global south? So the classification of countries with developed and developing economies, as well as the divisions of regions into north and south, are both measured based on development and wealth. So the concept of north-south divide originated from the development of Brundtland in 1980s, showing how the world was geographically divided into relatively richer and poorer countries. So despite the notable development gains globally, raising millions of people out of absolute poverty, there is still substantial evidence that inequality is widening between the world's richest and poor countries. For instance, in 1820, the Western Europe's per capita income was 3 times bigger than Africa's, but by 2000, it was 13 times as big. So in light of this, as the environment continues to deteriorate, and along with the growing global inequalities, billions of people in the global south struggle to satisfy basic human needs. And southern countries have actually demanded the north to assume responsibility for its immense contribution to major environmental problems, but the north has only accepted the principle of common responsibility on the basis of its superior technical and financial resources, while rejecting the responsibility on the basis of its historic contributions to this crisis. Now, how can international relations help in this concern with regard to the extremity of environmental pollution and the increasing gap between the North and the South? So there are several suggestions for this, but we argue that in this paper, we focus on the importance to acknowledging the fact that most of, if not absolute, frameworks, paradigms, and perspectives in international relations scholarships are based on and dominated by colonial minds, Eurocentric knowledge confined to the colonial matrix of development. So for instance, Dr. Dalia Simangan has mentioned in the article, Where is the Anthropocene IR in the New Geological Epoch, that there is limited anthropocenic discourse in IR dominated by Western paradigms, while the global South perspectives remain underrepresented. Hence, it is important to include and understand the relevance of non-Western paradigms found in other regions to broaden the understanding of the Anthropocene. So Dr. Simangan says, that, and I quote, regional investigations unpack the universalizing discourse on the Anthropocene and highlight the differentiated impact of global environmental threats. So regional perspectives on the Anthropocene could locally contextualize the long-term consequences and adaptive responses to the changing interface of social and ecological systems. Furthermore, a regional level of analysis could also help in bridging global action and local capacity, encouraging interregional cooperation, and helps in identifying and filling the gaps in knowledge that are often shadowed by universalizing discourses. Moreover, the colonial origin of the North-South divides shapes the international framework. Hence, there is a need for re-examination and possibly modification. So, for instance, the international law based on the study of Carmen Gonzalez justifies the colonial enterprise by constructing native populations as racially and culturally inferior, and by asserting a moral duty to civilize them through compulsory assimilation to European ways. Also, the global economic framework or structure that the export production or the export led development strategies enable the North to exploit Southern resources at prices that did not reflect the social and environmental cost of production. And much of the environmental degradation in the global South has been caused by the export-oriented production to satisfy the needs and desires of the Northern consumers rather than local consumption. Lastly, we also have to address the unequal distribution of national responsibilities and liabilities on damages related to various environmental concerns. For example, we have the study of Jason Hickel quantifying the responsibilities, and he provided just framework for attributing national responsibility for excess emissions and a guide for determining national liability for damages related to climate change. So this is consistent with the principles of planetary boundaries of 350 parts per million atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration and equal access to atmospheric commons. Now, in conclusion, apparently there is a substantial difference in severity of environmental pollution between affluent and poor countries, especially with the capacity of the capability of the latter to respond to environmental concerns. And recognizing this is a step towards minimizing the gap between those countries. So it is also important to note that although the global North has the means to afford the consequences of the environmental pollution, eventually they will still be affected by the increasing risk of the ecological crisis in the long run, because globalization does not only trade ideas, knowledge, information, goods, and services, but also global issues that are now drawing public concern and in need for immediate solution. Hence, we have to recognize our responsibilities and be accountable, be it our historic contribution or in the present, to this phenomenon. And these are my references. And that would be all for my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Stephany, for your presentation. We will proceed with the second presentation. I would like to read the abstract. Okay, so let me just get to the abstract first, because it seems that I have a lot here. Okay. Okay, here, panel proposal. All right, there you go. Okay, so for paper 2, we have AnthropoSEEN, recognizing accountability in the global environmental change in the 21st century. It reads, so the abstract reads, today we live in the Anthropocene, the age and time when human activities have become the main driving force behind Earth's geological changes. And the common denominator of human impacts on the biosphere is a lack of hope it is causing from the fear of the future's growing insecurity. In the face of climate change, where no inch on a planetary scale is spared, who then do we turn to? The unprecedented environmental crisis today, a product of global cohabitation, highlights that states from around the world are ecologically interconnected. And because of the urgency it presents, they are required to come together and agree on how to move forward through a collaborative effort in the form of global agreements. At present, political actors are compelled to offer solutions and yet are not willing to dissect the responsibility tied to the causes. This presentation will address the gap between ideal solutions and the extent to which measures have been taken on the ground to combat the following: the environmental price of technological developments of mankind, the overconsumption that comes with a rapid increase of human population, the emergence of the capitalist global economy, and the anthropocentric attitudes toward the environment. The discussion will cover how policymakers are at the fulcrum of the environmental crisis. Clearly, it presents a challenge to policymakers, such that in order to effectively respond to environmental issues, a sustainable framework of development and economic progress must be employed. One puts the relationship between the states, the economies, and the environment under scrutiny. Ladies and gentlemen, Bea Castrence for AnthropoSEEN, recognizing the accountability in the global environmental change in the 21st century. Bea, we will now play your video. Okay, if I may do so, I will project this first. Okay, let me just share my screen so that I can. Okay, let's have this. All right. So let me just present this. Okay. So we had Stephany earlier. We will now have Bea. This seems, okay, let me just play this.
A pleasant morning to one and all. My name is Bea P. Castrence.
Oh, that was paused. All right.
A pleasant morning to one and all. My name is Bea P. Castrence. I am a third-year student from the University of the Philippines, Cebu. Today, I present my paper entitled Anthropocene, Recognizing Accountability in the Global Environmental Changes in the 21st Century. So the outline of my paper is as follows. Firstly, introduction and overview. Secondly, the rise of the global capitalist economy. Thirdly, the role we play recognizing accountability. Fourthly, world leaders at a pivotal position, decision-making at the fulcrum. Fifth and lastly, conclusion. So to begin, today we live in the Anthropocene, the age and time when human activities have become the main driving force behind Earth's geological changes. And the common denominator of the human impacts on the biosphere is the lack of hope it is causing, from the fear of the future's growing insecurity. Hence, the circumstances today necessitate us to radically challenge the existing political, social, and economic structures holding the modern world together in one piece. After all, in the face of climate change, where no inch on a planetary scale is spared, who then do we turn to if not ourselves? So the second part of my paper discusses the capitalist roots of the environmental changes in the 21st century, specifically on the rise of the global capitalist economy. So since time immemorial, human existence has made immense impacts on the environment, from hunting and the discovery of fire to the domestication of flora and fauna of civilizations, towards the Industrial Revolution, even and most especially until today at present. So the world economy stood witness to a whole new wave of economic globalization that is characterized by the integration of different economies through a wide array of bilateral and multilateral regional trade and investment agreements. Consequently, corporations can now have a flexible and dispersed production process around the world where components of the products they produce can be produced in numerous countries that specialize in it, and that the final assembly may be done in another. So under this light, global capitalism can be heralded as a system that fosters technological innovations, the exchange of culture and knowledge, the opening of opportunities to develop and developing economies alike, and the assurance of the continuity of various supply chains. Yet, on the other side of the same coin, the global capitalist economy is unjust in the sense that only a small fraction of the population of the world controls the vast majority of the world's resources. Therefore, it leads to a disproportionate and hyperaccumulation of wealth. It generates conflict over access to basic human necessities like food, water, and land. So the presence then of the environmental resources into the economic stage signifies that its protection is contingent on its usefulness. Environmental degradation is a product of a system failure of not being able to put a value on the environment, such that, since environmental assets are technically free, it tends to be exploited to an extent of ensuring a continuous supply of resources to support the entirety of humankind. Clearly, the global capitalist economic system is no doubt unsustainable. It breached numerous ecological boundaries from which a vicious cycle is created. One that now spins faster in the presence of new technologies, faced with the urgency to support the world's rapidly growing population, which leads to the fueling today's climate crisis. As such, we then are at a pivotal position to assess the role we play in recognizing accountability. So central to this paper is the recognition of accountability. In essence, accountability involves the awareness of choices, taking ownership of decisions, and entails being willing or obligated to take responsibility for actions taken. Hence, there is an underlying assumption that there is an existing motivation to create a positive counteraction. So as such, accountability in the sense can be horizontal, vertical, and diagonal. Lerman A. et al. 2020 drew out the differences between the aforementioned types of accountability. Firstly, horizontal accountability, which rests on the symmetry of power, e.g. the agencies of the three branches of government, legislative, executive, and judicial. Secondly, vertical accountability, which involves the asymmetry of power, which is hierarchical in nature, e.g. governments and its people. Third and lastly, diagonal accountability, which involves the presence of external actors, such as the media and the civil society, in holding targets accountable. So this implies that the people's exercise of their participation in domestic democratic institutions plays an important role in international relations. So for this very reason, domestic democratic elections are accountability mechanisms that motivate leaders to act in accordance with their constituents' interests. This in turn entails that since leaders adopt political stances that best represent their people in order to remain in power, the voters and the mass of the citizenry who put them in office have every means and just as much right to vote the same leaders out of office. So in addition, Kyohei in 2003 argued, based on the theory of pluralistic accountability, that collective responsibility is difficult to identify in complex systems due to the presence of several decision makers and core groups. Hence, in a complex system, a system of accountability is highly likely to be imperfect. But even then, in the realm of international relations today, mechanizations towards accountability are currently in place. Sanctions, in essence, are put into action in order to coerce a target government to change its political behavior. So for this very reason, sanctions in the realm of international relations are another mechanism for accountability, the crucial levers in the operation of a pluralistic international system. So now we look into how world leaders are at a pivotal position and how their decision making is at the fulcrum in the face of the environmental changes in the 21st century. So globally, climate change presents an unfair distribution of benefits and burdens across actors. McClinchy 2017 argued that greenhouse gas emissions, for instance, cannot be confined within the state responsible for rapidly producing such, simply because naturally these emissions find their way into the atmosphere that causes global temperature changes. So in particular, developed countries along with high-income oil-producing developing countries have the highest global CO2 emissions per capita, with China, the United States, and India towards top three emitters, contributing around 50% of the aforementioned emissions. In this context, then, it is relatively easy for us to draw out potential harms, specifically because it will most negatively affect those living in less developed countries who have done the least to contribute to the aforementioned emissions, while those living in developed countries who have contributed the most will likely suffer the least. Harold M. et al. 2002 linked the poorest communities with the highest vulnerability in the face of climate change, because on the one hand, wealthy people in developed countries have several resources and readily available options in their arsenal of choices, making them equipped to prepare and even for a fast recovery from unprecedented environmental catastrophes. On the other hand, not only are impoverished communities in developing countries ill-equipped to sufficiently prepare for disasters, but they are also as ill-equipped in developing countries in terms of recovery afterward. In fact, the recovery usually relies greatly on the assistance of underfunded relief efforts of their government. So in the context of the global environmental changes in the 21st century, accountability then is a principle for good governance, as it seeks to prevent or mitigate negative social and environmental impacts. This implies that it is through recognizing accountability that power holders and leaders are expected to opt for environmentally sustainable legislations through the incorporation of the collective voice of the masses in the decision-making process. So under this light, leaders can shape the political conditions in the national and international processes by acknowledging the power imbalances to make way for positive and effective regulations. In status quo, for instance, COP, or the Conference of Parties, is taking the lead in heeding the calls of the climate crisis. And within the COP, the parties in question are the governments that have signed the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC. So then the overarching goals of COPs is to strengthen the country's capacity to, on the one hand, prevent further impacts, and on the other, to deal with adverse impacts of climate change. So pragmatically, this looks like, one, the provision of financial assistance to countries that are more vulnerable, whereby climate finance is crucial for both mitigation and adaptation because large-scale investments are required to significantly reduce environmental impacts. Two, technology development and transfer based on the best available science to fully realize technological mechanisms in the face of policy development and implementation. 3, capacity building to enable and equip parties to effectively and consistently respond and adapt to adverse effects of climate change and to generally reduce the impacts on the environment. So to highlight a prominent few, there are the COP24 of 2018 in Katowice, Poland, and COP21 of 2015 in Paris, France, where the former released a climate package to make the latter's Paris Agreement work and be attainable for all. In further focusing, the Paris Agreement is the first ever universal, legally binding global climate change agreement that brought all nations into a common cause to commit to combating climate change through concretized efforts. So with that, we head on to the conclusion. So the Anthropocene must be objectively seen as it is and be recognized as a time of our own doing. Concrete actions and sustainable frameworks that are anchored on long-term visions are only possible through the recognition of accountability. Amidst the hustle and bustle of the 21st century, environmental urgencies have brought nations together in coherence, cooperation, and unity to reflect and assess status quo. It is through a single set of visions and goals that world leaders are able to carry the banner of hope for a better future. In this sense, accountability may be horizontal, vertical, and diagonal in the international arena geared towards the establishment of a multi-level stakeholder governance, where public and private actors as the pillars of civic society action acts as the checks and balances on the ground. So to simply put it, boundless, limitless economic growth is unachievable within the confines of limited resources, but not unless we choose to act on it. Not unless we see reality as it is in objectivity and utmost visibility and recognize where we stand in the interwoven fabric that is a modern human life. So that would be the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much for that presentation, Bea. So we will have the same situation. Okay. Okay, I'll just exit first, full screen, and let me present once more this one. So I trust you are seeing this in your screen right now because the images here are actually hyperlinked. So what I'm going to do is, okay, so we will proceed now with the third. This is the second to the last paper presentation. Okay, we are done. We basically have had a glimpse of the disparities, the North-South divide, and then Bea, with the help of course, the presentation of Stephany, and then Bea earlier talked about accountability. This time would be about conservation, and this paper is entitled Greener Solutions and Analysis on How Habitat Conservation and Proper Wildlife Trade Regulation Can Prevent Pandemics. The abstract reads, the COVID-19 pandemic is killing thousands of people worldwide every day, plunging economies into a deep contraction, and at the same time illuminating socioeconomic inequalities. The virus responsible for the COVID-19 outbreak is believed to be zoonotic in origin, as have the others that preceded it. The frequency of zoonotic insurgence is associated with environmentally degrading human activities that result in habitat loss and wildlife disruption. Human activities resulting in biodiversity loss and ecosystems have created the favorable conditions that usher the insurgence of the pandemic. Viral spillovers affect all of humanity, but are mostly felt by the marginalized populations. Thus, in formulating ways to deal with pandemics, it is imperative to consider the socioeconomic implications of these pandemic prevention and mitigation measures. To minimize the chances of another disease outbreak demands changes and restrictions in the human-animal environment interface. This paper analyzes how a viral spillover concerns the international community and that habitat loss and improper regulation of wildlife trade harm the natural barrier between animals carrying deadly pathogens and humans, reducing human interface with wildlife and their natural habitat. Starts by eliminating transmission points, such as improved regulation of legal wildlife trade and conserving natural habitats, taking utmost consideration for the communities involved. Efforts to ward off marginalized poor communities from taking part in harmful environmental activities need to be supplemented by international assistance, including the implementation of environmentally sustainable economic opportunities. Ladies and gentlemen, to present the paper entitled Greener Solutions, an analysis on how habitat conservation and proper wildlife trade regulation can prevent pandemics, let me help present Mayumi Ampon's paper.
Good day, I am Mayumi. My presentation is Greener Solutions and Analysis on how habitat conservation and proper wildlife trade regulation.
Let me just do that again. Okay.
Good day, I am Mayumi. My presentation is Greener Solutions and Analysis on how habitat conservation and proper wildlife trade regulation can prevent pandemics. I'll start by filling you in on the background of my paper. The COVID-19 pandemic is killing thousands of people worldwide every day, plunging economies into a deep contraction and at the same time eliminating socioeconomic inequalities. It has indisputably shifted everyone's attention to previously neglected and pre-existing global concerns. To put the situation into some kind of perspective, it is important to talk about zoonosis as major global health threats. According to current scientific consensus, the virus likely originated from zoonosis, infectious diseases caused by pathogens naturally transmitted from animals to humans. The most likely explanation for the virus's origin is that it came from a pangolin at a wet market in Wuhan, China. Although the interspecies spread of viruses from their natural host and moving towards human-to-human transmission is relatively rare, chances of a spillover event significantly raise the possibility of the emergence of an adapted virus that is mainly communicable and can cause pandemics. The last century has witnessed at least 6 significant outbreaks of novel coronaviruses. As you can see, zoonoses take up a significant percentage of all recently identified infectious diseases. The world has also shown vulnerability to pre-COVID-19 zoonotic disease outbreaks. SARS spread globally, and findings show that the virus originated from cave-dwelling horseshoe bats in China's Yunnan province. SARS-CoV-2, a related strain, appeared in 2019 and caused a global pandemic. It also appears to come from a bat species. So regardless of origins, they all present grave threats to individual and global health. This brings me directly to my next discussion. There is a link between the unprecedented emergence of zoonotic diseases in recent years and the intensifying human-animal environment interface. As human contact with animals increases, the likelihood of cross-species transmission significantly increases. So the expanding human presence in wildlife spaces has consequently increased the risk of a zoonotic disease spillover. The human population growth and efforts to alleviate associated poverty result in the increased intensity of the human-animal environment interface. Culinary traditions that involve wildlife meat consumption and traditional medicine are also drivers of wild animal trade. Anthropogenic factors arising from human activities cause habitat loss that forces animals to move into human settlements to survive. Zoonotic threats can also arise due to the poorly regulated wildlife trade, and unprecedented transmission of pathogens within and among species can occur in poor sanitary conditions. In this part, I'd like to clearly identify the destruction of ecosystems and habitats and emergence of zoonosis with the neoliberal industrial paradigm or industriocentrism under the greater rubric of the Anthropocene. Paul Crutzen developed the term Anthropocene to describe a new epoch characterized by massive changes in the Earth's geology and significantly altering the planet. While many key variables associated to present environmental justice challenges are anthropogenic in a way that they are the consequences of man-made activities, the outcomes are not in the best interest of most humans. Kopnina argued that anthropocentrism is insufficient to demonstrate the role of human agency in environmental degradation because there is a difference between humanity as a whole and groups of individuals with industrial-centric worldviews. The Anthropocene has been synonymous with anthropocentrism or industriocentrism, as David Kidner has coined it, which values industrial interests above all else, collectively euphemised as progress. Kidner argues that the industrialist neoliberal ideology submerges both humans and non-humans in a self-serving predatory system. Everything living in the industrialized world is viewed as a resource to be managed, or in the case of non-humans, as a commodity to be consumed. According to advocates for strict conservation measures, even partial human use of fragile forest habitats will likely intensify the human-animal environment interface and handicap vulnerable communities whose livelihoods are dependent on that biodiversity. Kidner asserts the need to go past the human-environmental divide. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention employs the One Health approach that unites human, animal, and environmental health to accomplish public health, food and nutrition security, sustainable ecosystems, and fair trade facilitation. Therefore, in formulating ways to deal with pandemics, it is imperative to call for unified efforts to fully recognize that the current status quo is the enemy of human, animal, and environmental health. So now we've reached the part of the presentation where I'll talk about how to reduce human interface with wildlife and their natural habitat by also taking utmost consideration for the communities involved. I proceed with habitat conservation. Based on scientific data and research, the regular appearance of novel zoonotic diseases has connections to the deteriorating global environment, the loss of natural habitats of wild animals, viable reservoir of novel human pathogens, and increased man-animal conflicts are closely linked to the rise of pandemics. Habitat loss is also equated to unprecedented loss of biological diversity. When that happens, a vulnerable ecosystem makes a potential breach by pathogens become much easier. Zoonotic diseases such as West Nile virus illness and Lyme disease are less likely to create human health threats in a high diversity community of vertebrate hosts compared to those in human-impacted low-diversity communities. To prevent another outbreak, habitat conservation is imperative because when ecosystems have diverse species and space for healthy animal populations, they are less likely to be the reservoir of various diseases. However, poor communities rely on biodiversity primarily through provisioning services, which is the immediate use of natural reserves and commodities. As you can see, biodiversity loss threatens all life on Earth, including the marginalized sector that is most vulnerable. That is because biodiversity contributes a biological safety net more intensely felt in the lives of those who fetch water, till the land, and settle far away from the nearest health center. Biodiversity is critical for human well-being. Policymakers must understand and consider alleviating poverty and improving the conditions that force individuals to resort to environmentally degrading activities. And finally, let me now turn to proper wildlife trade regulation. Whether legal or illegal, the global wildlife trade enables disease transmissions that can lead to significant disease outbreaks. The COVID-19 pandemic emerged from a wet market in Wuhan, China, which sold wild animal meat for human consumption. It is not uncommon over East and Southeast Asia to have open-air shops of wild animals because wild meat is generally sold for basic subsistence. However, these animals are often illegally caught and stored in shocking and seriously unhygienic conditions. These markets pose a critical health issue, resulting in disease emergence and spread due to their improper hygienic and veterinary practices. The amount of zoonotic viruses increases with the trade route from the wild species or farms to the unhygienic markets. Due to the COVID-19 outbreak, the Chinese government banned the trade and consumption of wild meat. However, such bans affect those who produce and consume wild meat for health and livelihood security reasons. The livelihoods of millions of people globally heavily depend on the consumption and sale of wild species. Not only that, but in low-income countries or outlying areas, wild pests and animals are a vital source of food security and nutrition. Wildlife meat markets also serve as a primary source of protein in other parts of the world. A prohibition on wild meat should not compromise their food security. A blanket ban is not a viable and multidimensional solution in eliminating the chance of future zoonotic spillovers. The unintended consequence may involve growing illegal wildlife traffic, as transpired when bans were temporarily enacted. An international ban conceivably endangers the subsistence of smallholder farmers that depend on informal supply chains for income. For the regulations to be effective and sustainable, it is imperative to consider socioeconomic dependencies. Phasing out unhygienic practices in wet markets is necessary. However, a total ban will require working with local communities, understanding the fundamental drivers of wild meat consumption, overcoming issues to the development of alternative sources of protein development and consumption, and developing other sources of income. To better regulate wildlife trade requires international cooperation, such as resource transfers to low-income countries, to vigorously install such inspections at trade routes from the reservoir to its destination. The Global Burden of Animal Disease Initiative plays a significant role in this information sharing. Suppose there are no alternative protein sources. Resources for pathogen testing in meat demand to be readily prepared and accessible to local communities. As I conclude my presentation, let us retrace the key points. First, we note that the virus responsible for the COVID-19 outbreak is believed to be zoonotic in origin, as have the others that preceded it. The frequency of zoonotic insurgence is associated with environmentally degrading human activities that result in habitat loss and wildlife disruption. It sets up the alarm that diseases do not appear in a vacuum and reinforces immediate action to prevent future pandemics or reduce their risk in the changing global environment. Second, the crippling effect of a pandemic is a multidimensional challenge causing complex burdens and requiring a collective response, especially from the global community. Viral spillovers affect all of humanity but are mostly felt by the marginalized populations. Industriocentrism indicates the premise that both Earth systems and living beings who rely on biodiversity are vulnerable and that they should be safeguarded. Thus, in formulating ways to deal with pandemics, it is imperative to ensure animal and environmental health and at the same time consider the socio-economic implications of prevention and mitigation measures. Furthermore, we consider that spillovers are likely to happen in the future. Preventing pandemics should start by minimizing the human-animal environmental interface. Habitat conservation is a must because it produces multi-layered protection from novel zoonotic pathogens. Wildlife trade is a vital source of protein, income, and livelihoods for many local or rural communities. However, more rigorous regulations on trade, the sale and consumption of wild animal species are fundamental criteria that ensure the balance with the probability of a zoonotic disease spillover. Efforts to ward off marginalized and dependent communities from taking part in harmful environmental activities need to be supplemented by international assistance, including implementing environmentally sustainable economic opportunities and viable alternatives regarding reliance on biodiversity. That will be all. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for that presentation, Mayumi. Incidentally, Mayumi is, okay, let me stop sharing for a while. Right, so yeah, incidentally, Mayumi, and I believe a little bit, no, in the case of Bea, maybe having a bit of connectivity issues, but Stephany will be able to answer questions with, live. Maybe Bea to a certain extent, but Mayumi may be having a bit of trouble because from her place, it's raining really hard. I was informed earlier, no, by Stephany. So in case there are questions later on, specifically directed to Mayumi Ampon, that paper that was earlier shown, please make sure to just type it. And then if you can please also send us, I'll probably just get your email address later on so that we can send your question to Mayumi, and then Mayumi will be sending her reply via email. Okay, so at this juncture, we are approaching the last part, which is more on citizenship. So essentially, the fourth and last paper is about intergenerational responsibility versus consumerist Anthropocene, reflections for global citizenship. Okay, this is my paper, and I wrote this particular abstract. Allow me to read. So, as a prominently critiqued attribute of modernity, consumerism is a consequence of standardized, if not ideologized, metrics of development in the neoliberal or capitalist world order. Its concomitant tendency to monetize value for immediate material gains, even as it is imperceptive of externalities, has expanded dichotomies in international relations from the global north-south divide to a planetary human and non-human disharmony in the Anthropocene. Meanwhile, the imperatives of stewardship on a planetary scale challenges state-centric duties of citizen allegiance under the Westphalian international system of nation-states. Drawing from the concepts of liquid modernity and critical theory, in contrast to problem-solving theory, this paper reflects on the evolving concept of global citizenship in relation to the concept of intergenerational responsibility as situated in the Anthropocene. So that's the abstract. I will be, in my presentation, before I begin, I will be reading a portion of a book chapter that I have written in a forthcoming publication, The Contemporary World, okay, with FISO. And it is still actually in press, and you will see this later on as I project my presentation. For now, let me just share my presentation. Okay, let me just, okay, all right. There we go. Okay. Presenting, let me share my screen once more. It will be my desktop. Okay. Or I don't know if this is possible, I will just do this. Okay, are you seeing my PowerPoint slide? Is it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Let me just present it. Okay. So let me begin my presentation with this particular quote from John Green, the Anthropocene Reviewed. So it actually, if I may read, humans are not the protagonists of this planet's story. if there is a main character, it is life itself, which makes of earth and starlight something more than earth and starlight. But in the age of the Anthropocene, humans tend to believe, despite all available evidence, that the world is here for our benefit. So good morning once again to each and everyone. Allow me to present my paper entitled Intergenerational Responsibility versus Consumerist AnthropoSEEN, Reflections for Global Citizenship. Okay, so let me begin with the concept of citizenship. Citizenship is a political concept that is typically ascribed to a person's connection with and substantiated by fidelity to a political unit, usually a nation state. In fact, in Black Law's dictionary, citizenship is defined as the status of one who, under a particular state, is a member of a political community, owing allegiance and being entitled to the enjoyment of full civil rights. Thus, the concept of conventional citizenship, it suggests group belonging to the exclusion of non-members, okay? And also, even if living, it also shows that it is separate, despite, the separation, for example, of church and state in most countries, okay, there is a parting of ways at the exclusion-inclusion junction with humanity and planetary belonging that characterizes what we will later on, of course, be encountering, the concept of global citizenship. So how does non-belonging proceed to a belonging that excludes? So you will note citizenship, the conventional concept, it includes those who are part of the political community, but excludes all others. So it would be a question now, how does non-belonging proceed to a belonging that excludes, and then later on further advance to a belonging that includes the rest of the excluded? Because here, this is again from the one that I told you earlier, the Global Citizenship book chapter in the Contemporary World Book Project of FISO. Okay, so we have these three dimensions of citizenship: political, legal, and psychological. So that political dimension involves or entails participation. And of course, we note about agency here. And then, of course, if it's legal, it's a status given and you are granted rights and protection. And meanwhile, psychologically, we have the sense of belonging and we have the sense of identity, therefore. Of course, in the jargon of global citizenship, in the jargon of the Anthropocene, we heard about the Anthroposenic agency. Okay, so let us move further. So you would note that the story of citizenship suggests a cyclical story from wandering to settlement and back. Thus, perceiving and experiencing different parts of the globe has evolved from nomadic travel by foot to explorative voyages on land, sea, and air, even outer space, to digital surfing or digital civic engagement by netizens, quote unquote, or digital citizens, okay, using the keyboard, mouse, or touch screen. Okay, many of these explorations have enabled discoveries. Okay, let me just proceed. Have enabled discoveries. Have enabled discoveries of differences among people that tend to inspire consciousness, if not assertion of sameness, that motivates participation in, endow legal status from, and or foster a sense of belonging to a community. Citizenship, therefore, proceeds from this relationship between the individuals and the community, as the community becomes the socio-political structure, identity reference, and domain for civic engagement of citizens. Membership in a political community is the essence of citizenship. Active membership in the police or city-state by the hoi polloi or people through shared governance with office holders and consented moral governing authority or legitimacy of laws are a legacy of Athenian democracy. Hence, the concept of a polity, the political unit, as reference of identity. Meanwhile, passive membership proceeded from Roman imperial reach that expanded membership rights to subjugated non-Romans. Balancing passive inclusion with the need for social cohesion becomes challenging as societies become more diverse. Then again, a sense of belonging arises when members see themselves to be the people or integral to a common demos. Okay. So for much of human history and development, citizenship rights, participation, and belonging have been sourced from the nation state. This complementarity of citizenship's conceptual development vis-a-vis an international system of nation states has associated it with territorial attachment to the bordered space of the sovereign state, the embodiment of a political community. Belonging tends to be the psychological glue for a political community, for the political community to develop its identity as an imagined community, the words of Benedict Anderson. As members identify with their kind, notwithstanding the impossibility of face-to-face acquaintance among all of them. Consequently, as nationalist identity becomes inscribed with territorial confinement, citizens are expected to profess allegiance to the nation state that guarantees their protection, rights, and participation. Thus, if citizens waver in their loyalty to the nation state by aiding its enemy, especially in times of war, they could be held liable for treason. However, as other structures emerge in globalization, the challenges that affect the community arise beyond territories. The fixedness of citizenship in the imagined community of the nation state becomes increasingly disputed. Greater mobility and transborder consciousness and activism to shared risks and vulnerabilities are redefining citizenship as we conventionally know it. So moving backwards, this one would show to us, this table shows to us the conceptual expansions of citizenship from the so-called conventional citizenship to cosmopolitan citizenship, post-national citizenship, transnational citizenship, and then of course, global citizenship. Okay, so we have implied legal status excluded, okay, sense of belonging to a broader community and common humanity, okay, and of course, there is a deficiency here, okay, which we are warned when we have the discourse on the Anthropocene. It naturalizes Western supremacy, though not critical global citizenship. Okay, let us have a brief view of what global citizenship is, okay, because the complexity and magnitude of problems beyond state borders are blurring the relevance of territorial boundedness. Okay, so here is, and hence, therefore, the need to go beyond the confines of the Westphalian world order of nation states.
What is global citizenship education? The world is getting closer than ever. But in the world, problems like conflicts, poverty, inequality, and environmental destruction are becoming more serious. Is this the world we want? No. We want a more peaceful, just, and sustainable society. Who can make this possible? We can. And when? Now. We are citizens of the world, and we need to foster global citizenship to create the world we want. Then who is a global citizen? A person who travels abroad, or who can speak foreign languages, or who helps poor countries? Global citizens are those who respect the values of justice, equality, and diversity, and take actions to bring changes. Global citizenship education is for you, me, and all of us. And it is an education for everyone's more just and peaceful future.
This is more or less from UNICEF, okay, what global citizenship education looks like. I know it's a long thing. I'm not going to discuss it. I'm just showing to you that as far as global citizenship education is concerned, there are three main domains of learning: the cognitive, social, emotional, and the behavioral. These are the outcomes, the attributes, topics, and you will note at the last part here that it is up to upper secondary only. In the Philippines, we have the contemporary world, whose second to the last chapter is about global citizenship. And that is one important thing that we need to emphasize, and this is where I'm coming in with what we are talking about in this conference: how consumerism in the neoliberal and capitalist world system has more or less imbricated and monetized everything and commodified even people, including people. And so you have these, the evils of consumerism, as early as even the psychologists, no? In June 2004, in August 2009, New Scientist has been publishing this, consumerism is eating the future. Of course, we have also the concept of the doctrine of perpetual growth by Richard Robbins in this particular book, Global Problems, okay? And in the concept of liquid modernity, Zygmunt Bauman also made a follow-up of his work, liquid modernity, with his book, Consuming Life, and that the drive to consume, and if you are unable to consume, you now become what he calls a flawed consumer. And then especially in the digital age, you go to the internet, become interconnected, you think it's free, but you become the merchandise yourself. So that's commodifying the self. Right. So in this more recent, this is a 2021 issue, okay, how the world embraced consumerism, okay, we note that the commodification of reality. So reality is now even commodified with post-truth, no? And then the manufacture of demand. So we note that supposedly there is a difference between wants and needs, but that we have instead the manufacturing of needs. Okay, so making wants needs. Okay, and from here, there is a very poignant message of this particular article. Okay, allow me to read that one. All right, where is that? Okay, let me just locate that particular note. Okay, here. Right. It seems that it's not loading here, but that's a very, okay. The historian Benjamin Honeycutt, who examined the mainstream press of the 1920s, along with the publications of corporations, business organizations, and government inquiries, found extensive evidence that such fears were widespread in business circles during the 1920s. That was the 1920s, imagine now. Okay, Victor Cutter, president of the United Fruit Company, exemplified the concern when he wrote in 1927 that the greatest economic problem of the day was the lack of consuming power in relation to the prodigious powers of production. So we are kept and trapped in the vicious circle of consumerism. Okay, people, okay, now on to the imperative, okay? Because of so much consumerism, is there a way to break from the shackles, okay? Now, in the Philippines in 1993, there was this landmark case that was decided by the Philippine Supreme Court, and in fact earned an award internationally for the legal counsel, Cebuano Antonio Oposa. Okay, Oposa, in this landmark case, okay, he actually brought the case and represented 43 minors through their parents, of course, because minors do not have the capacity to act before legal jurisdictions. Okay, so through their parents, their concern about the issuance of timber license agreements that would make faster, okay, that would make more rapid the deforestation, okay, in the Philippines, okay, brought about this class suit. And in this landmark case, the Supreme Court allowed this class suit and in fact caused the halting of this potential environmental damage, okay, by, of course, stopping the then Department of Environment and Natural Resources Secretary Fulgencio, the late Fulgencio Factoran Jr., okay, citing intergenerational responsibility, that the minors through their parents can actually file a suit to even the government itself to stop environmental degradation, to ensure that there is a healthful and balanced ecology, okay, in accord with nature. That's assured by the Constitution in Article 2. This is intergenerational responsibility. The minors of today invoking the rights, not only their rights for the present, but also the rights of the generations that are yet to come. It is cogent in this particular talk because global citizenship is something that should be localized, or what you would note here, an instance of local citizenship, okay? It is something that may sound so abstract, but it starts with education. And I would say that, okay, that in order to be able to get from, or to get to the point from the latitude of violence, okay, to the latitude of justice, it is important to invoke rights and make authority, in this case, the government, accountable to the rights of those generations that are yet to come. That is the very concept of intergenerational responsibility, okay? Of course, with limited time, I would be willing, I would very much encourage questions regarding this. This is, by the way, the plane of power or powerlessness that I am developing in and would soon be published in a forthcoming publication, although in the context of human rights of children in the Philippines. But this is also true when we look at the essence of power, because when we talk about international relations and educating citizens to be global citizens, it is important that we know how to make use of whatever power that we have currently. There are impediments to this, particularly, and that's why here is my recommendation page, okay? We need global citizenship continued or sustained in the university. Again, in the Philippines, we have global citizenship as a chapter only, unfortunately, in TCW or the contemporary world, okay? But to have it sustained, it is something that must be imbricated, that must really be infused in curriculum. In teaching international relations theory, it is important that we also mainstream critical theory that includes green theory, because again, the discussion of IR theory is really more on Western, the dominant realism, neorealism, liberalism, neoliberalism, even constructivism. Yes, of course, a bit of Marxist, but we need to have other critical theories in or on the buffet table. And of course, for IR pedagogy, we need to have problem-based learning. Why? Because in the book chat, no, sorry, in an article entitled An Ideology Critique of Global Citizenship Education by Pais and Costa in 2017, they note how education is neoliberal, is marketized, in that education prepares students to be employable rather than to actively engage with the dark side of globalization, or for this discourse, the discourse of the Anthropocene, the global Anthropocene. And this is corroborated in 2021 by Naylor and Veron's article entitled Geographic Education in the Anthropocene, Cultivating Citizens at the Neoliberal University. One major problem is not only the neoliberal character of education, that it has become marketized for employability, but also the difficulty, extreme difficulty of cross-disciplinary approach to education. That's why they made this experiment on PBL, or problem-based learning. So hopefully with these recommendations, we in the discipline or in the area or in the study of international relations will be able to incorporate important or necessary changes so that we can mainstream the discourse on the Anthropocene. With that, I end my presentation. Thank you. And the panel is now ready for questions. Allow me to stop sharing. Okay? Sige. Thank you very much. We now proceed with the questions. Maybe we can entertain one question. All right. We have until 10:25 because we need to prepare for the next the next panel. Okay. So do we have questions from the participants? We have 33 participants. Ms. Lorna, please proceed. You can unmute yourself. Ms. Lorna, you are recognized, or the technical team
Yes.
can probably, okay, Ms. Lorna, go ahead.
All right. Good morning and congratulations to the panel members. I find the panel very impressive because I have heard a lot of areas of questions, answers also, and this will help in all of us to look at Anthropocene at a multi-dimensional level, because the current discourse now is that it's so linear. The world is dying, we need to save it. And the narrative stops there. So I like the presentation of, was it Mayumi? The whole notion of industriocentrism. Yeah. And in many ways, I was thinking as I was listening to everybody, in a manner of speaking, the Anthropocene is a critique of the current consumerist attitude, monetized, and commercialization. But I was wondering why those who are into the Anthropocene, those who are promoting it, are not saying it explicitly, that we need to have to reshape or reconfigure our consumerist lifestyle, etc. They stop short. There is a silence to that, and I think this panel have articulated it quite strongly and quite persuasively. I like that. So that's my general comment, and I think we need to put that on the table, because those who are into the Anthropocene are scaring us, and that's why I like Archill, your presentation about it's not human, it's life itself that are at stake here, the life of a vegetable, the life of a lizard, the snake, and of course the human. So in the Anthropocene discourse, all the other living entities are eliminated and the humans become the superstar, right? Right. Anyway, so in the interest of time, and I'm sure others will have a comment, I like the notion of the global citizen, and we still need to have a lot of conversation about it. And actually, it reminds me of, there's this thing called the continuum between food security, and that is the common norm. No, we need to have food security. And there's actually another debate to that. The concept of food sovereignty, which is more radical because it's now people who will because food security, now you become attached to the state. You become attached now to farming, commercial farming. So no one is promoting actually food sovereignty, because now we're putting everything in the hands of the people themselves, right? So, and I think, Archill, it's a very fantastic topic for our conversation. And maybe I'd like you to explore the very notion of sovereignty, a sovereign life, which is being promoted actually by George Bataille, because he was critiquing our acquisitive, our economics, how it is making us commodities. And he'd like us to point to someone who leads a sovereign life. These are not, this entity is not concerned with having wealth. Of course, it is concerned with the need to survive. Think about or imagine here the Buddhist monk and their begging bowl. They only need a small begging bowl because they need to have a life. They do not work. They live and they meditate, they pray, and they're not going to starve because people will give them food anyway, and they only need this much. So, and we have actually people who live a sovereign life, the beggars, the squatters. They're not so concerned with these material things, right? So maybe you can explore that to the whole, because what makes me actually come because it's lack of a better term, no, we attach to the citizenship, and I'm not comfortable because in many ways it will attach us to the state, it will attach us to global capitalism.
Correct.
We are trying to detach from that. So
Mm.
maybe try to explore the notion of a sovereign life to that global citizenship. Thank you. That's all. And
Okay.
congratulations again to the panel. Wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you so much for your kind words, Miss Lorna. Actually, I see already connections, possible connections between the concept of sovereignty, which is something that is very state-centered. It's even the ASEAN way, very, very protective of sovereignty, and the concept of people as the political sovereign, supposedly. So they could really click as to whether or not there will be convergence points between the concept of global citizenship and sovereignty, particularly in this case, you said food sovereignty. The intersections, I can see already the intersections bursting already, no? So there are so many things that we could explore in those concepts. So thank you so much, Miss Lorna, for such a wonderful idea. I really love it. No, this is a very good and accelerating moment for the panel. Yes, Marlui, I see you raising your hand. Please
Okay.
proceed.
Yes, good morning. Just as a sort of continuity, because I observed this concept of sovereignty. What's interesting is that what's this? This Sunday, I think we have the gospel about the widow who only gave the most of what she had, which was basically 2 cents. I think because there's some context to consider, attorneys, because in Judaism, the widow has to depend on his son because no husband, right? But also that the thing is that Jesus praised the woman for was her surrender to God. But one reason why that surrender exists is because in the first place, society is expected to help her. So I think this concept of citizenship, but it's not that transcends borders. It should actually help us recall what the original shape of society was beyond the coating of any ideologies, the social responsibility of citizens. The thing is, like, one of our concerns, like, I mean, not all our concerns, but one thing I've noticed in discourses about citizenship is that whenever we see migrants, we're worried about losing jobs and all of that. But as I see it, I'm taking this lens from my experience with my upcoming presentation about Pope Francis, is that we have to look at the city. That's how we view things right now in the world, the city, because every person that we encounter may not even be like an unidentified citizen of our nation, yet somehow we're expected to encounter them the same way we encounter our citizens. It's not that national citizenship doesn't matter. It certainly does, because that's how we express our identity, imagined communities. But at the same time, what about the idea that we are not exclusive? We don't have zones here. So if there are widows in the world, society is expected to help them. That's why Jesus actually didn't praise the Pharisees. They gave a lot, but they didn't sacrifice. Whereas the woman sacrificed. But at the same time, what he did not praise was the fact that those who had more were just giving, but they didn't really have the responsibility. So I think, if we try to keep examining the problem of consumerism, we realize that we have become so exclusive in our view of citizenship that we do not acknowledge our responsibility to the others. So I feel that we have to recover that idea of sovereignty or citizenship, so to speak.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Profound thoughts there, Marlui. And that's the thing, because of the imbrication, the entrenchment of consumerism, even the norms of capitalism actually rewards. So I believe we may, a starting point probably would be to provide disincentives for consumption and consumerism, because that's how the metrics are. You are developed, you are progressive if you consume a lot. The age of mass consumption, for instance, okay? That should not be the norm. And this discourse, hopefully, on the global Anthropocene should really come up with a counterpoint to this, and that instead of consuming as much as you can, it should be that we consume only what we need. Okay, again, not to be hijacked by the wants that are prepackaged by the capitalist system or neoliberalism as needs instead of mere wants, but it's really going back to that basic. And that's how we probably can exercise our sovereignty, that we have the power to consume only what we need, and what is in extra is now what we have as our responsibility also to help others. So, and that's a good starting point for the recalibrated understanding of citizenship, and in connection with sovereignty. Okay, so we have last 2 minutes. I would like to hear, there is one other comment from Dr. Rommel. Go ahead, Dr. Rommel. You are recognized.
Oh, thank you, Archie. I'd like to second the motion what the Ma'am Lorna said. It's a very interesting, very impressive panel. Thank you. Now, we are all educators here, and because of that, we really have this kind of urge, the passion, the desire to really help out. And in the process of doing this, we would like to educate our students, the society, about Anthropocene and all these kind of problems. And on the other hand, I am bothered by the possibility that by doing so, we might also be socializing responsibility for what we have become. So since yesterday, we have been talking about, and also in your panel, about accountability, intergenerational accountability, and we know how difficult it is for the countries that are most responsible. They are most capable with all the resources and power. At the same time, they are also the ones that are hesitant to be fully accountable and do really something about it. So when we, on the ground, we promote this kind of responsibility to educate, I am worried that these countries are just so happy that we are socializing. It's everyone's responsibility. It's humanity's responsibility now. So that's how do you, I wonder, how do you strike a balance in that kind of situation? Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. That's a really thought-provoking question. I do understand that there is that slippery slope somehow, that if we try to assert our agency, then the big ones will just get away with what they want in the long run. But that's precisely why we don't do things piecemeal. We probably need to do things simultaneously and in a coordinated, programmatic. I was questioning Dr. Dalia yesterday about initiatives that would more or less be programmatic to ensure that there are accountability mechanisms in place, and that in the education side, we make sure that our universities, for instance, would be able to get away. We demonize as much as we can and show that what we need is not the neoliberal mindset that, when you get educated just so that you can be employable in the future, but rather to actively engage with the problems of the day, with the dark side of globalization, for instance, because the education system is really entrenched in this neoliberal and vice versa. So it is important that we are able to strike the balance. It's important that there are simultaneous attacks at these key points, so that we can make strides in the education front so as to make it less marketized, and then we can further activate our sense of sovereignty and autonomy, our agency as people, especially we in the Global South? I hope I more or less addressed that, but that particular question also needs a lot of time to ruminate. No? We need rumination on that particular question, and I really am so thankful for that question. The time check is it's actually 10:27. Much as the panel would want to stay longer to entertain questions and comments, we are really out of time. I think that for whatever questions you have, I would like you to send, let me just type to everyone. Let me just check. I'll probably type my email address so that whatever questions you have for our panel, I will present those questions to our panel members. Okay, Stephany, Bea, and Mayumi. Right now, I think the one who can actively answer would be Stephany, and I think a bit of Bea, but Mayumi cannot because of connectivity issues. So I will just type my email address for the questions in case you have further questions. This has been a wonderful experience to be able to present our paper to you. Thank you so much for listening and helping us learn more and explore possible other areas to really learn about the concept and the topic about the global Anthropocene. Thank you so much, and may we enjoy the rest of the day. There are still more panels to come, so I hope that you will attend those panels as well. Thank you so much to our commenters, Ms. Lorna Marlui, and of course, Dr. Romel Kurami. Thank you so much. See you. Thank you also to the technicals. All right.